2 weeks ago, my wife and I celebrated 17 years of marriage. 17 years! I'm 40 now, and she's been married to me 17 years. I'm not going to say her age. But at one point, I looked over at her while we were on our anniversary trip, and I said out loud, "You are more beautiful now than you were the day that I married you." And I meant it. I know that husbands are supposed to say that kind of thing to their wives, but I really meant it, and I mean it. I look at my wife and I realize I seriously outkicked my coverage. And if you've never heard that expression, outkicking your coverage is an expression that means you married up. It means that you married someone who looks way better than you. And if you think that maybe I'm being modest, which let's be honest, you don't think that. But in case you do, here's a picture of my wife. Now, here's a picture of me. That's an example of outkicking your coverage, and that's what I did. The Bible is full of stories of people who outkicked their coverage. But it's not relationships. It's the people who accomplished far more for God than anyone ever anticipated. These are not the heroes, the awesome men and women of faith. These are the everyday men and women, the people like you and like me. The ones who, let's be honest, we just don't expect them to change the world. Jesus had this habit of picking those kinds of misfits, the people that you would never expect to change the world. In fact, in one story in particular, there's this guy, and this guy is a problem person. It's said of him that he is crazy, that he would cut himself with stones, and he would scream and yell at people. He would chase them around, and worst of all, he would do it all buck naked. I mean, this guy was an issue. This guy was a problem. They would tie him up with ropes and with chains, and he would break free, and he would chase them all again. And so Jesus, in the middle of the Gospel of Mark, he goes to where this man lives. And he shows up, and he gets out of his boat, and the first one to welcome him is this guy. I mean, it's like the worst welcome party ever. Now, spoiler alert, this guy, the crazy, naked, cutting himself with stones man, he goes on to change the world. And the question is, how? How does he go from this to that? I mean, this is the question because it's our question, right? Like we don't have that problem. That's not us exactly. But we do have a story. We do have our stuff where we look back on our lives and we think to ourselves, God could never use this to change that. The other night, I'm laying in bed, and all of a sudden, a memory comes back. Does this ever happen to you? I'm laying there, and this memory comes flooding back from 30 years earlier. I was graduating from elementary school to middle school, and we had this pool party. And I show up, and everybody's already there. I'm like the last one to get there. And everyone's already there swimming and doing their stuff. And so I run to dive in the water. And when I do, my swim trunks, which weren't tied on tight enough, go just shooting off my body. And I'm in the middle of the pool, surrounded by my friends, buck naked. This is nightmare fuel. This is the kind of thing you don't recover from. Now, here I am at 40 years old, and I can say I'm fine. But here I am 30 years later, and I still think about it. Isn't that weird? 30 years later, I'm laying in bed. Not only do I think about it, but I feel it. And I bet you know what that's like. I bet that you have those times laying in bed where something will come back from when you were a kid, or maybe it was a week ago, or just 5, 10 years ago, and it'll come back to you, and you don't only remember it, but you feel it. The embarrassment or the shame. It's amazing how our memories work, right? Our brain is so good at hanging on to moments of pain, humiliation, and failure. We remember them so well. Twice in the Bible, in Isaiah and in Jeremiah, God speaks through a prophet and says something to the effect of, I will not remember their transgressions or sins anymore. Twice in two different books of the Bible, it's like God is reminding us. He's saying, remember, I'm not holding this against you. You're the only one hanging on to this. He forgives and he forgets. This is important about the character of God. We see this with Jesus even when after he's crucified and he raises from the dead, he's speaking to Peter, who literally denied him. And he says to Peter, he says, I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom. Now, I have right here a key to my next door neighbor's house. Like he gave this to me for when he goes out of town so I can get in and feed his dog and take care of things, maybe drop off his mail, those kind of things. He put this in my care. But he didn't give this to me the first day that he met me or after a weekend. It took years of building trust for him to let me have a key to his house. Because that's how we work, right? We have to earn trust so that someone can have something like this. But Jesus doesn't work like that. Jesus trusted so quickly, he trusted so easily, and even after people would fail and fail and fail, he would trust them again. So we have this crazy, naked man chasing people around. And Jesus shows up and he does what he always does. He heals him. He fixes him and repairs him and restores him. And the guy is better. And so he starts sitting with Jesus and learning from Jesus. And then all of a sudden the townspeople, who are probably thinking, where did that crazy guy go running out to meet Jesus. And they get there and they see the guy, the one who every time they had seen him is always naked and yelling at him. And he's sitting there and it says he's clothed and in his right mind. And the people are afraid. They're terrified. Their response to seeing their biggest problem go away is not thankfulness, amazement even. It's fear. They're afraid of what Jesus can do. And so they beg Jesus to leave. Speaking to Jesus, they say, get out of here. We just don't want you here anymore. And they're begging him to leave the area. And so Jesus does. He goes back to his boat. And Jesus gets in his boat. And then Peter gets in the boat. And then Matthew gets in the boat. And John gets in the boat. And disciple after disciple after disciple they all get in the boat. And then this man who had been with Jesus, he comes to get in the boat. And Jesus stops him. And he's like, where do you think you're going? And the guy's thinking, I'm going to go with you. I want to go and be a disciple like these guys. And Jesus says, no. The guy who every time he meets someone in the Gospels, we're so used to hearing him say, come follow me. Come follow me. No, to this man, he says, no, you're going to stay. You're going to stay and you're going to tell everybody what I did for you. And he does. And the last thing we see about this man is the story that everyone was amazed by what he shared. The people were amazed by his story. I mean, this guy walked with Jesus for what, like a day? A weekend maybe? It wasn't long. He had no training, no experience. He didn't have a seminary degree or anything like that. He wasn't a master of the Bible. He was just a guy. He was a guy who had a story, a before and an after, about his encounter with Jesus. That's all he had, and Jesus told him to take that encounter, that story, and go out and change the world. That was the expectation put on him, just a guy, to change the world. And the people were amazed. Now, these weren't just people, these were the very people who rejected Jesus. And this should land in a certain way for us, because we know people who reject Jesus. We know people in our circles, in our lives, in our schools, in our jobs who don't respond to God the way we want them to respond to God, and it's easy to wonder why. It's easy to wonder, what do they need to see God in their lives? And maybe the answer is you. Sometimes the story of how Jesus works in a person's life, it begins with them hearing the story of how he's worked in yours. James Harrison is known as the man with the golden arm. When he was 14 years old, he had a major surgery where he required a blood transfusion. And he came out of that surgery knowing that that blood had saved his life, and he said, when I turn 18, I'm going to start donating blood. And he did. And soon thereafter, they realized that in his blood, it contained an antibody necessary to cure a deadly disease. And so he donated. Over and over again, he gave blood and plasma because he knew that every time he did, lives were saved. By the time he turned 81, when they stopped letting him donate plasma, he had given over 1,000 times. And over 2.4 million people were saved and alive because of his sacrifice. That's a great story. 2.4 million before and afters because of James Harrison. Like James Harrison, we have something inside of us that the world so desperately needs. Something powerful, something unique. We have a story of how Jesus changed our life. We have our encounter with him where we had a before and after. And like James Harrison, we have a choice. What are we going to do with it? Are we going to keep it to ourselves, or are we going to share it with the world that so desperately needs it?